Joining us in studio today at the All West New York studios in the old Carborundum building, 1625 Buffalo Avenue, Niagara Falls, New York, is Matt Smith from 1120 Press. Why do I screw up the introductions more often than not? Last week I had Mark Polenkars on, and I almost introduced him as County Comptroller Mark Polenkars, and I caught myself, and I caught myself with you as well. But 1120 Press, which I'm sure has some significance.
It's my birthday, 1120.
Gotcha. So 1020 would be completely. 1020 is closer to my birthday. Maybe that's what I was thinking. My birthday's 1015, so maybe I just wanted to wrestle control of that wonderful operation that you've got going.
Not exactly original, but I'm a big Henry Rollins fan, and he has a publishing house, 21361.
All right.
And so I'm kind of copying him with 1120 Press.
And Stephen King wrote a book about that, right?
I don't know. I'm not a Stephen King fan.
No? No, so Stephen King wrote a book with, now I'm going to screw it up, Kennedy's assassination date. 11/22/63?
Yes.
Yes. That was the name of the book, was 11/22/63.
I should clarify, too, that I have nothing against Stephen King. It's just his books overwhelm me, and, I don't have the patience to read the number of pages he writes. Although I read his book on writing, which was sensational.
Have you had much chance to interact with Nick Lucido from Exum Priory?
No.
Nick is an old friend of mine. Used to do a podcast here on All West New York. Lives in the neighborhood here, basically. And he just kind of gets around. Good guy. He was sitting where you're sitting a couple weeks ago, and we somehow almost spent the entire show talking about books. Was not the intention, but we did. And we both have the same basic view of Stephen King. My view of Stephen King is that he's a phenomenal writer, but cannot write an ending to save his life. And that's, so maybe a book writing about writing, coming up with an ending isn't quite so necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how much I liked that book, but it was really sensational, and it takes really delved into a lot of his personal problems, too, which I did not know that he had. And, I as a writer myself, I was a journalist my whole career, and I've written books. I'm an author, and just his output, his prolificness is something I just admire.
Him and Dean Koontz.
Yeah.
Dean Koontz puts out a book every 6 months. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
So you've been a writer your whole life? Did you go to school for journalism?
Yeah. I was a career newspaper man, and I worked for several daily newspapers throughout the state, and then I ran the desk for the Associated Press for a time. So I was in charge of all the reporters for the Associated Press in New York State, north of New York City. So like at the State House, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo.
Gotcha.
So my background is print journalism. I've spent a couple decades in print journalism.
Great. And are you still doing that? Did you get out of it?
I took an early retirement.
Good for you.
I had moved around a lot in my journalism career, and I had moved my kids more times than I ever intended to or wanted to. And when I was working for the AP, they were going through a point where they were laying thousands of people off, because they're worldwide. And they weren't going to lay me up, but they were going to relocate me. And I wanted to stay in it. I wanted to relocate. I would have been up for it. They were going to send me to either Newark or Milwaukee. I was hoping for Milwaukee. I didn't want to raise my kids in Newark. But my son was in 7th grade at the time. Middle school is a tough time to move a kid. My kids are different. If it was my daughter, who was older, I probably would have done the move.
Right.
But I didn't want to move my son in 7th grade. So after 20-something years in journalism, I went to work in communications for the State Teachers Union, and I stayed there for long enough I had a good contract, and I was able to retire early. So that allowed, I raised my kids in Albany primarily, and that allowed me to move back to Buffalo because my wife works for FedEx Ground, and she was able to transfer anywhere in the country. So which was cool because both of my kids, even though they're not from here in Buffalo, they both went to college here. They always considered Buffalo a second home because my family was here.
Now, did you grow up here?
I did.
Whereabouts?
I grew up right behind the Southgate Plaza in West Seneca.
All right.
Yeah, so
I lived in West Seneca for a time.
Yeah, so it was interesting because I had been away from Buffalo for 33 years, and I could not remember how to get anywhere. And I relearned Buffalo through my kids, who didn't grow up here but both went to college here.
Right.
My daughter actually went to Niagara University, and she ended up staying here after she graduated. She's a clinical cancer researcher. And so that was another reason we moved back, was to be with her, So.
What does your wife do?
She's a manager at FedEx Ground.
Oh, you did mention that. I'm sorry.
And she works for a living.
Gotcha.
That is a tough job.
So you were a journalist for, most of your adult life, then went to school, went to work for the teachers union. Your kids both went into the medical field in some way or another.
Yeah, my son.
They decided I want to make actual money. Whatever Dad's doing is not working for me.
You know it. You know it firsthand. You don't earn any money in journalism, neither newspaper or radio. But no, the funny thing was they were always really good in math and science, and I wasn't. And my son is an epidemiologist. My daughter's clinical cancer researcher, and they actually had a rule when they were growing up that Dad did not get near their science homework or math homework. And I didn't. And so they became successful because I did my part and stayed away.
Now, you say you're bad at math, and I tell everyone I'm bad at math. But I can add, subtract, multiply, divide like nobody's business. I can, 4-digit numbers, subtracting in my head, no problem. It's once you get past that, I am completely lost. Are you the same?
No.
No.
I'm really bad
at adding. Do you forget that the number 8 exists sometimes?
I'm bad at adding, subtract. I'm one of the few people left in the world that keeps a checkbook.
Gotcha.
Just because I like to just always be on top of what I have. And my checkbook is fraught with errors.
I don't even try. I have a check. I write one check a month.
Right.
It's for my rent. Here.
Yeah, I don't even know the last time I wrote a check.
Yeah.
I just like to keep a balance handy.
Right.
To see where I'm spending.
Yeah.
And
I just check my apps.
Yeah.
This is how much money I have in the bank.
Right. Yeah. Me too. But
I hope it's right.
My math errors in that checkbook are shocking. They're shocking. If I told you my SAT scores, you would be shocked. You would think I was lying. They were so low. But,
all right.
Yeah. No. So.
And then you went to work for the teachers union.
Yeah.
So you're
in communications.
Fair enough.
They kept me far away from numbers.
All right, so 1120 Press. I feel like you've been around for quite a while because you made quite an impact. But It's only been a couple of years.
Yeah, I grew up, when I was growing up in Buffalo, I kind of grew up in that first wave of punk rock and underground music, and my brother was in the band Snapcase, which is a very well-known hardcore band, and they're still around today, actually. So I was a scene kid when I was living in Buffalo in the late '80s, and I always kept my finger on the pulse, and when it came to music, and when I came back to Buffalo, having been a scene kid when I grew up, I was curious what was happening in the scene, and so I use journalism as a way to get into it. And the other reason I started...
Do you have any musical ability?
Yeah, I'm in 3 bands.
All right. I would call that some musical ability.
Yeah, so I'm a bass player. I'm the world's worst drummer, and I do vocals for 3 bands right now. But, back... I can remember being in a band in the 80s, and we played at a venue that was as big as an airplane hangar, and 3 people came. And it was a feeling I never forgot. And I've told this story before. Based on that feeling, that was one of my motivations in starting 1120 Press, because I want to make sure artists are seen, local artists are seen.
Right.
They're an important part of the community, and they work hard, and the talent in Buffalo is amazing across genres. And so I just felt like I'm a journalist, I'm a music fan. I'm an art fan, and this was just my way of trying to make sure artists were seen.
Now, you've used the word seen and seen in 2 different ways here. And the first time you said seen, I thought you said zine, which to me, that's what 1120 Press is. It's
I would
zine.
agree with that.
It very much reminds me of the old school punk zines, skater zines. Has that feel to it? Has that vibe to it?
Yeah.
Was that the intention, or is that just kind of how it works?
There was I don't know if it was a conscious intention to make it to replicate that zine feel, but there was a look I was going for, So I would probably agree with you.
Well, and I would say focusing on punk and punk adjacent genres, like you do, really lends itself to that format.
Yeah, and I kept through my brother, who actually he's a few years younger than me. We're both in our 50s, but he still puts zines out.
All right.
And his I'm always impressed by his physical zines, and he has let me work with him on a few of those. So I've kept my hand in that world. Yeah.
All right. So you started 1120 in 2023.
2020. Yeah, 2023. You're right. You know it better than I do.
It says the only reason I know is because I try to do a little bit of research before people get here, so I know a little bit about them. Otherwise, it'd be like, so Julie.
Yeah. So actually, 1120 Press started as a publishing house for authors.
Gotcha.
Because the publishing industry changed, and it went from. I'm kind of convinced that if Norman Mailer and J.D. Salinger were getting their start now, we would never hear from them.
Oh, no.
Because publishers now are controlled by conglomerates who want books by Jerry Seinfeld and, entertainers and reality stars. And so a lot of independent authors have to go the self-publishing route, and self-publishing companies rip writers off because they know writers are desperate and will spend more money than they should.
Sure. There's a lot of parallels between publishing and producing albums.
Right.
Because now anybody can do it, which is great and not great.
Right.
And it is. I really feel like it's easier than ever to make a CD and have it physically made and put it out there to be bought. But the process is almost too easy, and so as a result, how do I put this? Things that we should want to hear get drowned out by crap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same with publishing.
Right, and the thing with publishing too is self-publishing companies, they prey on authors, and it's not easy, to produce a CD, to produce 30 CDs, it might cost $80.
Mm-hmm.
To produce 30 books, you're over $1,000. Right. Not everybody can afford that.
Sure.
So self-publishers would rake writers over the coals. They knew writers are desperate. So I started 1120 Press originally as a publishing house where I would publish writers, so they wouldn't have to spend a cent publishing their own work.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's the way it should be. And it went okay, but it didn't really meet my hopes. There were a lot of writers that wouldn't take part in their own promotion, which is essential. So I had halted it for a while, but I kept the URL for the website. And when I moved to Buffalo, I just kind of recast 1120 Press as a music magazine.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now I started All West New York Radio so long ago that I almost forget the process by which I started. But not obviously, I would imagine that when you first started, you kind of had to get out there and introduce yourself to people and really kind of make the rounds. Now, you seem like a pretty extroverted, personable guy, but did you have any difficulty with that?
Absolutely not. And one of the reasons is because people in Buffalo are cool.
I couldn't agree more.
Everyone in the scene, no matter the genre, just really welcomed me. Cooperative. I walked into Gutter Pop Comics on Hurdle Avenue and got talking to Stephen Floyd, who's the owner of the shop. Turns out he's a musician too, and one of the best bands in Buffalo.
I do feel like most people in Buffalo are musicians, somehow or another.
he's in a band called Personal Style, which is actually one of my favorite bands in Buffalo. I didn't even know that he was in it. Great punk band. But I was telling him, I got to talking to him, and I was telling him my plan. And he just took it upon him. He said, I'm telling him my plan about what I want to start this magazine, 1120 Press. He's like, hold on a minute. He walks in his back room. He comes back out. He's got a stack in his hands of contact this person, do a story on this person. And that got the ball rolling. And some of the people he suggested became good friends, very helpful, and it just built from there.
Sure.
So one of the people he introduced me to was a guy by the name of Andrew Burgess, who is he's actually a professor of rhetoric at UB.
Okay.
But he's a comic book artist, an author, and I reached out to him because his work really struck me, and it turned out he was the bass player as well in Skyway. And
they were on the show last week.
They're great people. They're some of the nicest people that I've met in Buffalo. And from there I've just built relationships. As a matter of fact, Andrew, for my own band, I'm in a band called the Sneers, and he's done a lot of the artwork for our EP covers. So it's all relationship building. Right. And from being a journalist, and I spent my whole career being unwelcome, and you have to get used to that. So that's how I just worked my way into the scene, and everybody was welcoming.
And so you mentioned relationship building, and then being a journalist, and I don't think anything of this myself as having been a journalist for the majority of my life, but it is almost inherent that we make contacts with people. I meet someone, I get their name, I get their phone number. Maybe I get some more information. Maybe I add that in later. But my phone is just my. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and I don't remember what it was, but a name had come up on my phone, and it was the phone. Like somebody had called me, and it was their full name. Right. And he was blown away by this. Like, why would you have somebody's full name? And I don't remember what the person's name was, but let's say it was David. And I'm like, because I have 17 Davids in my phone. Like, of course, like I need to have their. And he's like, why do you have so many contacts? And it's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so, as a journalist, you get used to making these contacts, and it's not so scary to talk to people.
No.
So I would have to imagine that your background as a journalist, and obviously you're still doing journalism, but it's a different scene that I'm sure you're used to. I did politics. Politics was my main thing. I love politics.
Yeah.
I would still write politics as much as I could, if I had the time to. But, I call a politician, they might not return my phone call. I call the drummer from a band, they're probably going to get back to me.
Yeah.
So it's easier in a way. But at the same time, it can also be scarier because it's a different animal.
Yeah, I throughout my career I covered everything. I was a crime reporter, I was an education reporter, I was a military reporter. I covered politics for a long time. I was based at the state capitol in Albany, in the press room, and I covered the Pataki administration and the state legislature, and I covered a little bit of Spitzer when he was governor, and I covered a little bit of Patterson when he was governor.
I forgot David Patterson.
Yeah,
that's probably one of the Davids in my phone. In all honesty.
Yeah. So whenever I was feeling burned out, my editors would always let me. I'm a big hockey fan, so they would let me cover hockey. I would also, just to keep fresh, I would do a lot of music writing. Just to step away from whatever beat I was covering at the time and rejuvenate myself. And music writing was something I don't know, it felt natural. As a matter of fact, there was a former A&R guy for one of the major record labels when I was living in the Adirondacks. He was with one of the major record labels in New York City, and he had a place up in Saranac Lake. and he took notice of some music writing I did, and I ended up doing side work for him because he was working with emerging artists.
Mm-hmm.
And so, music writing has always been kind of in my back pocket in some way.
Gotcha. Now, it's not just you. You got like a whole cadre. You've got a team of people writing concert reviews and CD reviews and their thoughts on, whatever. How'd that happen?
Some people approach me. Some people I took notice of and approached them. Some people have worked out. Some people haven't.
Sure.
And that's life. But yeah, and everyone that and I do pay people. I have an organized labor background, and I just believe in paying people for their time and their work, and I wouldn't feel right about not doing that. I wish I could pay people more, but I do pay them, and it's just, and they're all really enthusiastic. They love the scene. They believe in the mission, and so they're really enthusiastic. They're young kids, and they're just their contributions are very appreciated. Sometimes it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's just me,
right?
And then the staff gets replenished. But some people approach me, and my attitude is, let's give them a shot.
Sure. So 5 years ago, my way of life, most people's ways of lives, significantly changed. COVID changed all Western New York. We basically went from, a website that featured your local news to a website that featured COVID death numbers and pretty much nothing else because nothing else was going on. And then in the post-COVID world, it has been difficult to get back to what we used to do. Just like it's been difficult for stores to go back to being 24/7, and it's been difficult for so many things. Do you think that you have an advantage, not necessarily over other people, but over what could have been because you started in a post-pandemic world? Have you thought about that at all, or is this the stupidest question you've ever heard?
It's a very good question. I haven't thought of the question in those terms, but I've thought of this subject a lot. And I've actually thought about putting out if not a special edition, a piece about this, because what I've noticed is it seems like I started 1120 Press at a time when artists were coming out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And they spent the pandemic holed up and working. And there was a period where once the world started returning to normal, they had all this music to release.
Sure.
And, it was just right place, right time. And even today, 2025, a couple years removed from the shutdown, there's still artists talking about how the pandemic impacted their writing and their work. And so, I've noticed that was a really weird time, and it was a bleak time, and people didn't know how to act. But what it did, it produced a lot of art. And there's a lot that is still coming out from that time, and because that's happening, there's a lot to write about. I've talked to some people. I've thought about this too recently. I've talked to some people about how after the pandemic, people were just so desperate to get out of their homes that they started attending shows again.
Right.
That is the troubling part for me because it seems to be waning a little bit. And I go to a lot of shows.
Right.
I go, number one, as a music fan.
Sure.
Sometimes I go as a photographer. Sometimes I go to support people that I have relationships with. So I go to a lot of shows. And there's too many shows in Buffalo that are empty.
I would agree.
And it's unfortunate. And there's too many talented artists who are just playing for the other bands on the bill. I went to a show the other night, and it was a fantastic show. The music was amazing. The room was spectacular. And it was just me and one of the artist's father followers in the room, and I don't know. People need to appreciate what they have here, and so that part of the oh my God, I got to leave the house and go see a show, that seems to be wearing off, unfortunately.
Right.
Except, and there's the one exception to every rule we're going to talk about is the Buffalo's hardcore scene, which is just packed.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different animal because there's a multi-generational facet to that scene where people who were in their 20s and in bands or fans of that music in Buffalo, they have always stayed in that scene. And now their kids are in their late teens, early 20s,
mm-hmm.
and they're going to shows with their parents.
Right.
And a lot of them are starting their own bands. And one of the cool things in that scene is some of the veterans who are in their late 40s and early 50s are starting bands with some of the newcomers who are in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
That scene, people in that scene stay true to it, and it's intergenerational. And that's the one exception to the rule, I think, in Buffalo.
You mentioned with the pandemic that it gave bands something to say. When Skyway was here, I joked with them, and I don't want to get too political, but in 2016, when we elected Trump, I jokingly said, well, at least we'll have some good punk music for the next few years. And then we didn't. And I was mad about that. And I said that to Skyway. And now, they said that, when he got reelected, they immediately wrote a song about it. That said, you deal with punk bands a lot more than I do. Do you feel that punk music is still saying something like it was when we were younger?
No, I don't. There are bands doing it. It's funny, an offshoot of 1120 Press was I've started an indie record label called 1120 Records. And
great name.
And Skyway is on it.
Right.
And so is Pretty Good State University, and both of them have written political songs.
Right.
Especially since the second Trump administration.
See, for me, growing up, when we
right.
grew up, we're basically the same age. Punk music was political.
Yeah.
And it got away. Politics got verboten. People just, no matter what it was, they wanted to stay away from politics, and that included punk music. Yeah. And I thought it would get back to. Anyway, I cut you off. You were saying brilliant things.
Number one, I think you're exactly right. I think when you and I were growing up, one of the reasons punk music was so political was there was always that cloud hanging over our head of nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing that is bringing punk music, bringing politics back to punk music, is war, Gaza. A lot of people in the punk scene are very tuned in to Gaza.
Uh-huh.
They might not be. I think their attitude toward Trump isn't any necessarily different than their attitude toward the Democratic Party. They're fed up with everyone, so they've kind of written politicians off. But they're very attuned to Gaza and what's happening in the Middle East, and that's igniting that's injecting a lot of politics back into punk, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
So, but there are people who are just at their wits' end about what's happening with the Trump administration, and as I said, Skyway and Pretty Good State University have written songs about Trump. So,
gotcha. Now, backing up just a little bit. You said you pay your people, which is awesome. I don't remember seeing ads on the website. Do you have a revenue stream, or is this
I don't.
So much like myself, this is just an expensive hobby for you.
Yeah, it's a very expensive hobby. I'm very good between this and my record label. I'm very good at losing money.
Yeah.
But
family's got to love that.
Yeah,
Gee, Dad, it wasn't bad enough when you were just getting paid shit. Now you're actually losing.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before the show, but our kids, my kids are grown, so
right.
That's it's weird, even though I didn't get a raise technically when my kids kind of fell off my budget, it felt like I got a raise.
Oh yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
but yeah, no, I don't have any. There's no revenue stream really.
Yeah, when my oldest graduated college, now I didn't directly pay for her college, but she did come to me on a somewhat regular basis and say, "Hey, Dad, can I have, money for this or money for that, or give a couple $1,000s for this?" And then once she graduated college and moved, and she's now engaged, she has stopped asking me for money, and it's very liberating.
Isn't it amazing?
Very liberating.
It's just it's funny how that works. Like there was no like deadline in a calendar or anything like that. They just stopped asking for money at some point.
And then on top of that, not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before, do you collect Legos?
No, I don't.
Have you ever collected?
No.
Do you have any expensive collection?
Music, probably.
All right.
Yeah.
So I love Legos. I wouldn't say that I collect them per se, but I like to get Lego sets. Well, a couple of years ago, she got me the Lego Batcave, which is a $400 Lego set. My oldest daughter got me for Christmas, and I'm like, where did you get all this money?
Yeah. I'm seeing that with my daughter. My daughter's a great gift giver, and she's doing very well for herself, and she spends money on me now. Yeah. I like that. Every now and then she'll take me out to dinner.
All right.
And my wife will always say, "You pay, Matt, you pay." And I'm like, let her get it.
We went, my now wife, then girlfriend, went down. My oldest lives in Maryland, and we went to Maryland a couple Thanksgivings ago for dinner. And we went out to one of those all-you-can-eat meat places where they bring the meat to your, like Texas de Brazil. It's like $100 a person.
Right.
And I was going to get it, and my oldest daughter's like, "No, we got it." I'm like, "I'm not going to fight you."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, she's a lawyer. She makes good money.
Yeah, there you
go. I'm not going to fight her.
There you go.
That's it. All right.
Yeah, I wanted to just go back to the people in Buffalo, going back to your question about injecting myself into the scene when I first got here and how helpful they were in helping me get 1120 Press off the ground. The same thing happened when I explored getting this record label off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Was there's a lot of bridge people in the Buffalo scene. And what I mean by bridge people is just people who seem to know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, this guy? Oh, here, I can put you in touch with this guy. And, there's people like Joe Kent, who's I consider a bridge guy.
All right.
A really nice guy to talk to.
Never met him. Joe Kent, Think So Joe. His show will be on tomorrow at 6 p.m.
People like Mike Jeffers, he's a Buffalo school teacher, but he's been a drummer in 100 bands in Buffalo over the last 30 years. Great guy. People like Roger Bryan and Torsten from Triple Hammer Records. These guys have been around forever. They know everybody. And you can approach them about things, and they will help you. And a lot of these guys have record labels, you know. And so, they always took the time to answer questions that I had and let me reach out to them at, all hours of the night and drop in their DMs with weird questions, and they were always very patient. And whether it was getting 1120 Press off the ground or getting 1120 Records off the ground, just nothing but helpful. And I've tried to return that. I have a lot of people now who reach out to me for things. And, I really believe in the community aspect of punk rock and do-it-yourself, that do-it-yourself ethos. I'm a purist when it comes to punk, because I believe in the ethos and I believe in the community, and that exists here in Buffalo.
I think that there's something in many Buffalo musicians that, I don't know if it's a lack of ego or if it's just a genuine desire to help. But I feel like in a lot of industries, or maybe even in other places, you ask somebody for help and they're like, "Well, I can't help you because you might then get ahead of me." And there are some exceptions, obviously. But generally speaking, I don't feel like that exists in our music scene. I feel like most musicians that I have had the pleasure of dealing with will literally help any other musician in any other band for any reason, even if it means that other band is going to become more popular than their band. And I think maybe one of the reasons is the scene itself is very incestuous.
Yeah.
And, drummer from band A is going to end up playing for 4 other bands in the next 5 years. And so it's as though the entire scene, cross genres, is just one big collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to make it too kumbaya, because there are a number. A number of takers. But I think generally speaking, and you find the good people in anything you do, and they all realize that even if it's not a genre that they're interested in, they will help people because they've gone through the same experiences. They all, everyone's fighting the same challenges.
Right.
And, so I think they come from that place, and they are willing to help, and there's a lot of talented people who are associated with the music scene that are, I call them content creators, like photographers and people who have publications and I'm working right now with a guy named Thane McGarry from Shepherd Moon Studios, extraordinarily talented cinematographer who shoots a lot of shows. His work is top notch. I mean, and so I approached him 6 months ago because I was always interested in doing a documentary on Virus X. So we've been working on this documentary that should be out in September, but there's a lot of people to collaborate with in this scene as well. And so I'm just, I'm interested in helping and shining a light on the scene in more ways just through 1120 Press, because there's so much here.
Right.
There's just so much here. And I tend to, I came to 1120 Press with 30 years of journalism experience already. So I'm not a dude hanging out in his mom's basement,
right,
keyboard warrior. I do bring some expertise to this, and I just think that the scene deserves and the artists deserve attention.
So that perfectly segues to my next natural question. Where do you see this going from here? My goal is just to make sure it lives past me. I want to find someone who, when I'm ready to step away, just comes in and takes it over. Right.
I don't want it to go away. I don't want it to okay, this was here, now I'm tired or whatever, and I'm going to close it down. I want to find someone who will carry it on.
Understood.
Yeah.
So, what's that timeline?
Sometimes I think it's tomorrow. Sometimes I think it's 5 years from now.
But 5 years is the long end.
I don't know. I'm going to be 58, so I keep wondering to myself, even if I live to 80, how many good, it's when age starts creeping up in, and you start questioning, okay, how long can I do this? How long can I do that? How long do I want to do this? How long do I want to do that? I do know I don't have the answers to any of that, except that I know I want this to live on in some way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Matt Smith, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, and
anything
thanks for finally
meeting me. That I didn't ask you about, or?
I don't think so. No. I just hope people go and support shows, and not just genres they're into, but check other things out, because there's amazing, talented folk artists and songwriters and, indie artists and shoegaze artists and jazz artists, and not just punk artists and not just hardcore artists. And, Buffalo has everything.
It does.
So, you have to appreciate it.
It does. So. All right. Matt Smith, 1120 Press, here on Here's the Thing with me, Scott Leffler. We're going to take a break and play some music. When we come back, we'll have Andrew McGrath in studio. You're listening to Here's the Thing on All West New York Radio.